Both bullies readied themselves for the assault, still confident that they could easily win. Even though Lynn was damaged and tired, she still had some tricks up her sleeves. Just before they could attack first, Lynn practically climbed on top of the fence and jumped onto Hawk, being quick to strike him as much as she could with the bat. As he stumbled around the ground trying to get him off, Hank reached over and yanked her off his brother. But before he could deliver a swift punch to the face, Lynn was quicker and kicked under his chin. She delivered a bit of a bat to strike him off his gut, but this didn't seem to do much likely damage because of how flat the layers were. So instead she went for the legs, kicking them out underneath him. A process began to take place into which Lynn could divide her attention between the two bullies. As soon as one was down, the other would get back up, only to be knocked down again. Fighting between those opponents was much more easier than dealing with 5, but Lynn would soon realize just how hard it was if you were bruised and tired. Despite her best efforts, she couldn't permanently keep them down. They just keep getting back up for more. As the fight went on, Lincoln became worried as he studied Lynn's movements. She seemed to be moving relatively fast at first, but she was getting slower and slower as it dragged on. She's gonna run out of gas soon, Lincoln thought to himself, shuddering a little. Could someone please come and help us before that happens? Focusing back on Hawk, who was now pissed due to getting another bad strike to the face, took a swing at her head. Lynn responded by ducking under the arm and delivering another hit to his head with her bat. Unfortunately, she didn't hit him hard enough to earn a stun, to which it allowed the spiky-haired teen to grab the weapon while Lynn still held on and tossed at the fence. Lynn screamed upon the impact, sliding down to the face, shaking her head. Lynn tried to stand up, but only for Hank to elbow drop right onto her. The 13-year-old let out a massive scream when that happened, so much Lincoln jolted and accidentally pulled Connor right over on top of him. When the impact occurred, her legs were almost exposed, part of her body that was in contact with the ground, and Hank's weight landed directly onto her injured leg. Lynn could feel her shin bone breaking into pieces, but the bullies didn't care. Hank lifted her up as pain-filled tears started pouring out of Lynn's eyes, and of course, squirmed right in front of his grip as she got slammed into the hood of the car, making a sizable dent in the process. With it, while Lynn tried to break free from his grip, the bullies started laying onto her face first and chest. The Jacques wailed in agony as each blow she took, which each always got interrupted when Lynn took a hit to the abdomen. Lincoln and Connor subconsciously shook her each time they saw those brutes hit the 13-year-old. The lad had been wanting to cry to himself for the unable to do anything about it. He watched as Lynn's fate continued to kick with a lot of energy, providing that she still had some fighting left in her. Sadly, that energy quickly faded to the point where she just laid limp against the face of the car. Lincoln was so focused on the traumatizing scene that he didn't even notice that another car pulling up from behind of the corner. And Connor did, though. The direction hit Lincoln's attention. They got sucked in surprise as the two particular people got out. Gotta admit, Hank huffed, she was pretty good. Yeah, but not as good as us, Hawk added, feeling pretty beat of himself. Both of them had some bruises thanks to Lynn, who had a bat on them, including some of the teeth missing from their mouths. However, none of them looked even far worse than the sporty lad herself. Her face was marred with purple bruises, and a blood draining from her mouth due to the forced teeth removal. The blood was pulling out from her broken nose, and her left eye was swollen shut, and her hair was completely a mess with the ponytail completely undone. There was no telling what kind of damage was done to her chest, but judging from her labored breaths, it was safe to assume that Lynn had also had a few ribs cracked. Though through it all, the 13-year-old gave a weak moan, knowing that she was barely conscious. Suddenly, Hank felt his hot breathing at the back of his neck. Dude, is that you? Bro, I'm just standing right there. Hawk gave a side glance. Both brutes turned their heads, staring up at the two extremely livid 17-year-old blondes. Lori and Carol's pupils were witted out with rage as their faces were beet red. Girls parted their lips to reveal a set of shark-like teeth. Feral growls escaped from them as they cracked their knuckles. But before they could even get a word in, the girls jumped them, pinning the two boys to the ground as they started beating them up so hard their mother might wish she swallowed instead. Lincoln and Connor gawked at each other before them, but Lincoln was also turned to his fifth oldest sister, who just slid off the car onto the ground. Lynn didn't even bother catching herself, landing on her stomach with a heap. Running over to her, Lincoln got on his knees and turned to her back. He rested his hand on her lap, tears slipping out as she got a good look at her injuries. "Lynn, please tell me you're still awake." Lincoln?" came the jock's quiet voice, as her good eye was still old enough to hold her brother's face. Lincoln was grimacing, returning how red it was. "I'm sorry, Link. I tried." Tears started coming out of Lynn's eye. "I tried." "Lynn, it's okay. You're going to be fine now, I hope." Lincoln momentarily looked away, watching Carol, and was in the process of choking out Hank, with Lori returning Hank with a literal human pretzel. He then turned back down at Lynn when he felt her good head go limp against him. "Lynn! Lynn!" The boy screamed her name. Lynn dared hear him, but she was too weak to give a response, as her world started to fade out, with her brain shutting down. The last thing she heard was Lincoln's muffled yelling, before the entire world faded into darkness. Lynn's mind was at blank, stuck in the void that seemingly to lead nowhere. The sporty lad didn't even know how much time had passed since she fell asleep, but preferred to stay in the comatose state, as her body didn't have to deal with the amount of pain it was going through. However, her brain now did thought about it. The pain seemed to be dull or non-existent. Not only that, there was a good, weird aroma filling her nostrils. A faint beeping was suddenly registered in her brain, which now she ignored it for a while. Once it started getting louder, she was starting to get annoyed. "Ah, what was that stupid sound?" Lynn groaned awkwardly. Shaking her head lightly, the jock felt something underneath it. Creaking her eyes open, Lynn blinked a few times, sucking in a sharp breath before opening them fully. Well, her right eye, that is. The left one still refused to open completely, but at least she could see out of it. Lynn gingerly moved her head towards it, as little painful it was to move her neck. Seeing some of the medical equipment like an IV tube and a heart monitor was on her right side, but she also saw another tube that appeared to go right up to her face. As best as she could, Lynn then looked down at her nose, seeing that there was some attached to it. No wonder why it smelled funny. Shifting her gaze towards, the jock realized she was in a hospital gown and that her right leg was suspended in a cast. Using her left hand, Lynn poked her chest, wincing upon little doing so. "Yep, those still hurt," she said to herself. It was then that Lynn finally noticed a ball of white laying on the side of the bed where her arm was, a snort coming from it every few seconds. Lincoln was in a chair and had his head resting on an empty space. It looked a little uncomfortable with how hunched over it was. Lynn doubted that he cared. Lifting her hand, she placed his hand gently on ruffled the boy's hair. After a few moments, Lincoln got on his own and lifted his head. He had a few bandages on his face along with cotton balls stuffed in his nose. The nose itself had a bandage on it, to which Lynn assumed that it was after he got it corrected. Lincoln looked at Lynn. "Hey," she smiled. Lincoln got up from his chair and brought her into a hug, being careful not of her chest injuries. Lynn did her best not to just to return it. "How are you feeling?" the older girl asked. "I should be asking you that. You have a leg cast after all." "Well, to answer that," Lynn frowned, looking at herself, "I feel shitty. I made a promise to protect you, and not an hour later I even failed to do that." The brunette let out a sniffle. "How am I supposed to call myself a good sister if I can't protect my own brother?" Lincoln grasped at her hand. "Lynn, remember what you told me at school today? That I should stop blaming myself for what happened? I can't still help but feel at fault for," he gestured himself and Lynn, "all this, but you did your best and didn't give up. And no matter how beaten you have or tried you were, I didn't expect those guys from last Halloween to show up, and I'm still surprised you managed to beat those guys in the fight with them afterwards." Lynn curved her lips in awkward silently. let's just say they pushed wrong button and that's what they had me pin. She frowned upon remembering being pinned against a car, being given a heavy dose of fists, looking at her brother. It doesn't look too bad, does it? Lincoln didn't answer, simply reaching over to the table where a handheld mirror lay on a weight. She showed Lynn her reflection, and Lynn couldn't help but cringe at her own face. Her eye was less swollen but still purple, and there were parts of her face. Daring to open her mouth, she was a bit surprised to see only a few teeth were missing. But man, it did her mouth hurt like hell before she was put under. Her nose was also had a bandage on it like Lincoln's. She could care less about how her hair looks like right around now. The door creaked open, getting the kids' attention. To Lynn's surprise, it was Maria. "Oh, good, you're both awake. Is everything all right, Lynn?" she asked, walking over to the equipment bed next to the bed just to make sure it was working properly. Lynn deadpanned a little. Do I look okay? My chest hurts and I can barely feel my leg here." She then looked at the mirror, staring back at her reflection more clearly. "Geez, what did they do to me?" Maria knelt down and placed a foot on her bed, grabbing the clipboard and was setting to a small shelf. The nurse started flipping through the papers. "Aside from being obvious that your shin bone broke into 3 pieces, 4 of your ribs were fractured, your jawline was almost disjointed, and it's amazing how you could speak clearly right now. Some teeth were removed, so you'll need to see a dentist for that. You also need to moderate concussion and surprisingly a small spinal damage." Lincoln went eye-wide at that long list. To think those bullies could do all that? The boy shuddered as he thought back to when Lynn fell asleep in his lap from those injuries. What if she never woke up? What if she and the ambulance came in too late to save her? Sensing her brother's distress, Lynn decided to change the subject. All right. It sucks." She put the mirror down. "How long was I out of it? I was thought sure those guys would come after you again." Lincoln gave a small frown of his own. "A few hours. Right after those guys stopped hitting you, Lori and Carol showed up and—" Lincoln looked a bit uneasy. "Let's just say those guys are still lucky to be alive right now. After they were done, Lori had pulled Carol off the other with the jacket before she knew she actually killed him. We heard sirens all come around and it was—" Lincoln bit his lips. "It was the police." "What?" Lynn nearly shouted, leaning up towards her bed. She gave a panned look at prompting Lincoln to adjust a bit. "Thanks, now, why did they show up?" "Someone called about those guys chasing me and Connor into destroying the property, and they saw Lori and Carol beating up those 2 bullies. So they all got arrested, including my sister and Carol." Lynn's mouth dropped a bit on the news. But why? All they did was just come and protect us." "I know, but the police wanted to bring them to ask questions. When they loaded me, you and Connor and Ronnie Ann to the ambulance, while those bullies were put into another." The jock then frowned. "They don't even deserve help." Lynn then looked around the room, noticing that there was the only ones there. "Where's everyone else? Do Mom and Dad know?" Lincoln nodded. Ronnie Ann was taken home by her mom since she got sick after rolling around in the trash. Connor was looked at. "Wait, who's Connor?" "The other boy was with. He's Carol's brother." Lynn mouthed an O, but of course, he still looked and saw the doctor said he was free to go, and I also could go, but I really wanted to stay. Lincoln stared at the bed. "All I did was call the house and I told Mom everything. I had to pull the phone from my ear because of how loud she was crying. She also sounded really mad, but the last thing I heard was that she and Dad said they were going to go to the police station and get some things cleared up. Connor also called his mom and said that she was just as angry, but not only that, Miss Santiago was really extremely upset, and there was no telling what her dad's going to have to say about it, or even Bobby. I think we can all agree those hooligans are going to pay." Maria spoke with a threatening tone, putting the clipboard back. She then moved to check the IV bag, making a note that it needed to be changed. Lynn stayed silent as she digested the information. "Did you hear that from our sisters?" The boy shook his head, removing his cotton plugs, seeing that there was no blood on them. The boy dumped them in the trash. "No, but I'm assuming they're going to—" Lincoln stopped upon hearing the stampede of feet coming down the hall. Maria went eye-wide and ran quickly to the door, stepping outside to halt a horde of people. The kids raised a brow in confusion as they heard the nurse scolding whoever it was outside. No doubt it was them making so much noise when other patients were sleeping. Several other female voices were heard, even uttering apologies. Maria slowly opened the door. Okay, now I want you girls to remain calm, and she was promptly pushed out of the way as she heard about her concerned Loud sisters. Maria even gave an annoyed stare as she fixed herself. So glad I don't have that many kids, the Latina muttered as she walked out to shut the door behind her. None of the girls were even hearing that comment. They stopped and gasped upon hearing the injuries of the siblings, especially Lynn's. As the usual Loud siblings, they were surrounded the pair, began to asking their own questions as to what happened. The twins hugged Lincoln, and Lenny sat with Lily on the bed, who immediately hugged Lynn's arm. They got louder as they tried to talk over each other, to which Lynn made a scowl. She already had a headache coming on with that, and Lincoln just told her that she didn't need 8 girls screaming right into his ear right now. Guys, shut up for 5 minutes, please, she shouted, coughing a bit as she strained her voice. They muttered apologies before Lynn spoke again. Look, I get it. You're all worried and you want to know the score, but for once, I can't handle 7 people talking. A knock on the door gave everyone's attention. Maria poked her head in. Sorry to interrupt, but this man needs to ask Lynn and Lincoln a few questions. She then moved to the side as a police officer calmly walked into the room. She was relatively short, about Lenny or Luna's height. She had brown hair, tied back neat into a ponytail. Hello, kids. My name is Officer Scoffner, and now there isn't really need to panic. Me and my other officers have got multiple reports of property damage, as well as a few fights occurring at the town park this afternoon. Amon knows who I assume are your 2 sisters, who are still giving the office their statements. She then took the notepad again. Now, since you both are here directly involved, I want you to tell me, as best you can, what exactly happened. Royalwood's police department was running on a business-as-usual schedule, even with numerous officers spread around downtown to gather as much statements about the assault cases and property damage that took place in that afternoon. Because of the low crime rate, most of the cells in the building were empty, aside from the occasional theft, tax evader, and jaywalker in those cells. Lori and Carol were waiting patiently for the police to make their final decision. Their parents were already at the station, no doubt demanding the release of their daughters, but that wasn't simple. Like all justice departments, they take assault cases quite seriously, and wanted to gather as much information as possible. The 2 teens already told their side of the story, so it was just a matter of getting from everyone else involved. Lori was sitting on the bench and her arms folded as she leaned back on the wall. She wasn't too concerned about being arrested as much as she was more concerned of the condition of her brother and sister. Lincoln didn't look as bad, but Lynn, just remembering the state that Jacques was in enough, was to make Lori give a deep frown. She gripped their shoulders tight as a wave of anger washed over her. I wish I had more time to literally rip his face in 2, she muttered herself. Her hands were no longer filthy from blood they gained from punishing Hawk, but slight bruising was still visible. This is bad. This is so bad, Carol stammered as she paced around the cell. She would have been doing that since they'd been taken in. Granted, it was immense shock that both the girls had the cops-slapped handcuffs on them, but Lori stopped worrying when it became clear they weren't in immediate danger about being put in orange jumpsuits. Carol, on the other hand, I'm too young for jail. I won't last 5 minutes in there. I didn't mean to nearly kill that guy. He just... She gripped her hair in frustration. Like Lori, Carol had some slight bruising on her hands. They were more evident on her palms, given that she had been doing with them. Lori closed her eyes in an attempt to stave off the growing irritation she was feeling. Carol, they're probably going to make us do 6 months for what we did. Carol! Lori opened her eyes again, knitting her brows together. I won't even get a chance to say goodbye to Cassie or Connor. Carol! Lori shouted, probably louder than she had to. The other girl then flinched and just looked at her. Lori then patted the space next to her. Come sit for a second. Carol meekly nodded and gingerly sat down. Look, I know you are worried about what's going to happen. I'm fairly aware how the assault cases go after enough watching of Judge Judy on TV. But I doubt they'll actually send us to jail. Lori turned off to fully face her. We're not the ones who victimize a bunch of little kids for fun. We came in and put the end to this shit they were doing to them. Carol rubbed her arm, biting her lip lower. But I nearly killed him. I know. That's why I had to stop you before you broke his neck completely. I understand how you were feeling, though. Lori gazed at the ground. When we got out and I saw my brother and the way he was, and Lynn, she looked a little. The only thing I wanted to do was to tear them both apart until they were nothing but paste. But after a few moments, that was all I cared about. But what I remembered was that I needed to get to my siblings in a hospital ASAP. Plus, it wouldn't do me any good if there was a murder charge on my head. The Loud then turned her attention back to Carol. I gotta admit, though, that actually was the first time I ever saw you go into a total rage fit. I think you actually literally lost yourself on it, too. When I intervened, you wouldn't stop struggling for 3 minutes until you finally came back to Earth. That officer was literally going to tase you if I hadn't slapped you out of it. Carol blushed a bit, moving a hand of Strad by her ear. When I saw Connor bruised like that, I couldn't help myself. She then leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The blonde had focused on the moth that kept trying to fly into the light panel above. I've been looking after my siblings since they were in diapers, and while Cassie was a bit distant from these days, I've always been close to Connor, helped him with anything he needed. Even during these times, it just makes me mad. I guess I kind of felt like Mom for a while, you know. Lori nodded. I had to deal with that with 10 siblings, and one of them is still a baby. Maybe I went a little overboard. Carol looked back at Lori. But he still deserved to get his ass kicked. Not arguing there, but your brother only did have some scratches and bruises. I doubt I could stop you if he was like how Lynn was. Thinking of her fourth younger sister again, Lori gave a depressing sigh. I just hope she's doing okay. Carol then put a hand on Lori's shoulder. I'm sure she is. The ambulance showed up not long after the cops did. The sound of boots meeting the tile got their attention. It wasn't long before an officer stepped into the cell, much to the set of keys in his hands. Much to the girl's hopelessness and confusion. Loud, Pringy, you're free to go. It looks like your story matches up with the other witnesses. What other witnesses? Lori asked. The other kids involved in the fight. The officer unlocked the door and opened, letting the teens walk out. However, we don't have the statements from those 2 boys you both attacked, since they're both still under heavy medical treatment. Several other persons who witnessed have also similar claims. As such, we see no reason to keep you here, but as an advisory, there may be a hearing about this. This didn't sit well in the teens, but at least the worried of spread night of jail was no longer a factor. The blonde then followed the officer to the lobby, and were immediately greeted by the arms of respective parents. Oh, my baby! Rita cried out, bringing Lori into a bear hug. Lori's cheeks puffed as air intense tried to escape her. Mom, I can't breathe! Sweetie, what happened? Lynn Sr. asked. Do you know how Junior and Lincoln are doing? Wait. Lori pushed herself off of Mom's embrace. You guys haven't been to the hospital yet? No, Rita stated, sagging her shoulders a bit. We dropped the girls off first and then came straight here. Then we were going to stop by after. It's clear we couldn't do anything to get you guys out tonight. Lori then became a bit uneasy. Well, Lincoln and Lynn are... The teen paused, seemed unsure how to break it down for them, even if she was unaware of their condition. And at the same time telling her parents what Lynn looked like before taking in would cause them to break down in tears, delaying their trip even more, grasping of their arms as if she was cold. I think it's best if you see it for yourself. Excuse me, Miss Pringy called out, making the Louds turn to her stance that showed a tad nervous look of what's about to say. Do you mind if we come along? I need to thank the girl who protected my little boy. Rita and Lynn looked at each other before the father gave a small shrug. I don't see any harm into it. And so we are here, with me stuck in bed and Lincoln fixed the nose. Lynn unfolded her arms as she finished her tale. The scoffner nodded, taking a quick moment to read over the notes before pocketing her notepad. All right, that certainly explains a lot. Thank you for your time, kids. She immediately turned heeled and walked out the door, with Maria following. They could hear the buzzing of the radio, to which Scoffner seemed to answer to, but this faded away sooner enough. Lynn then gave a side glance to Lincoln. I know a certain brat who is the reason and those baseball jerks were chasing you. Lola gritted her teeth. I'm gonna make him pay for this! She glanced at Lincoln. Actually, on second thought, you should kick his butt again, Linky. Yeah, that would be awesome, Lana piped up. Shove some mud in his mouth, too. May he rest in pieces, Lucy agreed. Normally, I would say violence is never a solution, but in this case, it is perfectly warranted, Lisa quipped. You should also add jokes about his hairstyle and hair, Luann laughed. Nothing goes wrong with making someone ring in those ears, especially if they earned it. Luna was next to him to say, Oh, and you can't force him to wear a mismatched clothing. Everyone looked at Lenny, who gave a confused stare in return. What, yellow and green? Just ew. Lincoln then scratched his cowlick and thought. Admittedly, at the idea of slacking Chandler was very interesting. He even had more of a reason even doing so with his sister stuck in hospital for possibly a month. However, the last time he did that, it was just made for Chandler to want to strike back harder. Plus, even if he did manage to send him to the hospital, that wouldn't make him just as bad as Chandler was. The boy wasn't exactly comfortable with the idea of people fearing him at all. So, as good as it sounds, girls, but I'm sorry, Lincoln leaned back on his chair. I'm not going to fight him anymore. A chorus of groans erupted around him. Aw, come on, why? The princess begged. I'm just done fighting, Lola, and I doubt me putting him in a state like Lynn wouldn't be good for anyone. And it did nearly kill back at the park a couple weeks ago, and all it did was just make Chandler cause me to even have more problems. He tapped his foot on the new lawn chair. Now that doesn't mean I want to get back at him. I still do, but just not that way. The girls then sulked a bit. They were going to be really happy if Lincoln ever went to town and on Chandler again. But like most times, they wouldn't pressure him if they were against his idea. As Lincoln sat and thought, he gazed at the sad looks on his sisters. Feeling a twinge about that, and of course, or if they didn't like that, he had the guilt about his decision. However, one he panned over to Luann and popped in his head. But I have a better idea we could pay him back, and I'm gonna need your help, Luann. The comedian raised a brow. Why me? Lincoln grinned. Let's just say I think April Fool's Day is gonna come early to Chandler this year. Luann went eye-wide, a big smile forming on her face. I'd say I lose my touch before I even hear you say those words, she chuckled. Wait, isn't April Fool's Day a month ago? Lenny incoherently asked. It's saying Christmas came early, dude, Luna explained. Christmas can come early? The blonde oldest asked in excitement, prompting the musician to facepalm. Anyway, I'm going to need a few days to plan this at home. Don't want to mishap on sleep after all. Lincoln nodded, stepping up. Home? Lucy asked in confusion. Her mouth gaped as she thought it possibly meant. You mean you're... Yep. Lincoln put his hands on his waist. I'm coming home. To our home. The boy smiled warmly. As Lincoln expected, it took a few seconds for the girls to register what he said. Before loud, cheerful screams had developed around the entire room, the boy quickly found himself stuck in a massive group hug. With Lynn watching with a warm smile, Lincoln returned the hug as best he could. And as he fully admitted to himself that he missed that feeling, to feel like a true sibling, to feel like a natural and younger brother, and to feel like a loved son, to feel like a loud. It was practically forging to him that he had wished that he never fully had seen his family like this. Were those all thoughts were just a few weeks ago? It's quite funny how 3 weeks can cause a lot of happen to change on many opinions to oneself. Gone were those days where resentment and anger? And now, well, who would have traded along the loving, protective sisters and dutiful parents and anything else in the world? Certainly not Lincoln Loud, and certainly proved that he has more to them than he would have imagined.